right, amen. All right, well, good evening, and welcome to our Friday night service. So we're going to go now to part 4 of the history of modern Israel. If you want to go ahead and get those slides up. The end of... Stop calling it a short history. Okay. I don't know if I ever said short, because I said it'd be many weeks. But it's part 4. But we left off in part 3. At the end of it, the one guy who was one of the pashas of the Ottoman Empire drugged them into World War I. And so World War I is where we're at. And World War I is, it's a huge, there's so much that could do. I just thought I'd start with this plug with Dan Carlin's Blueprint for Armageddon. If you're interested in hearing a lot of stuff about World War I, this is a great resource that you can listen to. It's over 24 hours. I don't know exactly how long it is. I've listened to the whole thing once. It was that great. Another guy that's now walking to the back has listened to it 3 times. It was that good. So that's a lot of stuff around World War I if you're interested in it. But World War I actually had quite a dilemma for the Zionists, because there's a lot of potential there. If you're on the right side, it can start catapulting what your aspirations and ambitions are. But if you're on the losing side, it could set you back many, many different years, on their development. And so it really had they had a debate, a vigorous debate between different people, because there were some Zionists that wanted to support the Central Powers in Germany and others that wanted to support the Entente. And you think about it, it's like even Herzl at the beginning, he thought Germany was his best ally on that just because of the relationships that Germany had with the Ottoman Empire. And in fact, what they did, they moved the Zionist headquarters to Berlin, trying to make further inroads there. And so there was a lot of stuff, that was going on there, and trying to get well or get good with the Germans on that side. The Germans, as they said, had the relationship with the Ottomans. They were the closest ones in Europe to them. And so it's like if there's any influence over it, it's like Germany would be that way of doing it. And also they were fighting against Russia. And Russia, all the pogroms that they were doing, there was a lot of still that things happening against the Jewish people. And so there was a lot of people that was like, hey, we can't support the Entente because Russia is part of that. And they're off, killing and rioting against the Jews. On the other side, though, Britain was the country that they had had the most success with. They had, the one guy, Chamberlain, who had offered them the place in Africa. And so they were the ones that are most sympathetic to their cause. And so a lot of people wanted to keep building up the relationship they had with Britain. And then, everyone knew, that if the Ottomans lost World War I, it was basically the end of the Ottoman Empire. And so they're thinking, all right, how is it going to be divided up or carved up even at that point? So they decided to go with the Triple Entente, because of the relationships that they had. And they even had formed what they called the Thezionist Mule Corps, which worked with the British Army. And it was about delivering and doing supply chain type stuff with the army that was made up of Zionists. And so they actually had a part in there. Also, this guy, Herbert Samuel, he was a British parliament member and part of the cabinet. And just a couple of months after World War I began, he started circulating this memo within the British cabinet, in January 1915, talking about the future of Palestine. And so, they already had inroads there, a lot of stuff already happening within Britain, which kind of tipped the scales, that way. There's a lot of stuff that he wrote in here, but it's basically about, making sure that Britain at that time was already thinking about establishing a place in Palestine for the Jews. So this was, just after the war started. And again, most of the people at the time thought that the war was only going to last around 6 months or so. because that's, again, the blueprint of what had happened in previous wars. They didn't realize how long it was actually going to take. But they had this guy in the British Parliament that helped them out, helped their cause a lot. Then we had the Turkish attack on the Suez Canal. So the Suez Canal was a strategic point for Britain. It had a lot of the shipping things there. And this actually, the attack was just in those 2 months. And a lot of the intention there was to divert troops away from other areas and make that Britain had to defend this area. And so they attacked it, and Britain started building up, the troops down there. They had about 400,000 troops at one point to repel that back. But that started their beachhead, if you will, in that area of the world. Then you have this guy, Hussein bin Ali. He was the sheriff of Mecca, and is the closest for that area, in charge of a lot of the Arabs there. And the British, they had built the bulkhead there, but they were thinking, if we go up that side, they're going to need some help, and it's not just the logistics of the men, but just thinking, it's a lot easier to do supplies if you're in friendly territory, if you have people there helping and all that. And so they started negotiating with this guy, trying to get him to start an Arab revolt in that area of the world against the Ottomans. And there was a series of 10 letters that was going back, correspondence. And the British, to try to get him to do that, told them, we'll acknowledge, a bigger kingdom. We'll give you that whole Sinai Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, up into the area, including Palestine and Syria, and that you can have that as an Arab state. And so they were negotiating that with him. He, in these letters, it's very clear, he's trying to do the borders, and the very northern part, the British guy wrote back and said, well, not in these, because, they were negotiating with France, and France has some interest and all that, but all these, are okay. And so this guy, knew what the Ottoman Empire, we talked about their genocides and, how they've been cracked down. He knew that if they revolted and it didn't go well and they didn't win, it's basically the extinction of his area. So for him to actually do the revolt with the people, it took a lot, for him to do. It'd be the extinction otherwise, and, that's not a good thing either. And so he basically went along, though, and started it. We'll see that in a minute, too. In the meantime, though, you can look at the times. This is still, January 3rd of 1916. Britain and France were doing their own carving up of that territory. And they had the Sykes-Picot Agreement that they made at that point about if they won the war, here's how they're going to carve up that area of the world. And that's where France had the upper part and Britain had the lower part of it. And they had already agreed beforehand, this is how we were going to carve it up once it's over. But this is done in the middle of those letters that was written to the previous guy too. So it's like they're making deals, with multiple people over the same territories also. And then they had the Great Arab Revolt. It started out numbered around 5,000 men at the start, and it grew to about 30,000 in 1918. And there's obviously some casualties. So if you talk about, the total number was higher than that overall. But again, it wasn't just the number of men that was there. It was the whole logistics and having that base to start up. And that's what brought about the Palestine Campaign. After they finished the Sinai Campaign first and rolling up the coast that way, they started the Palestine Campaign and going through. Their whole goal was to get up to Damascus. They figured if they could get up to Damascus, then they basically have broken all of the support of the Ottomans in that area, and they would, be basically done at that point. So Damascus was what their target, at the end. But T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, if you know him by that name, he was the British Army officer that was in charge of dealing with all of the Arabs, there, and he worked within them. And he realized right away that they were not trained at all for battle. You can see on the quote here, it says, "One company of Turks firmly entrenched in open country could have defied the entire army of them. A pitched defeat would have ended by way of sheer horror. I concluded that the tribesmen were good for defense only, that they were too free-minded to endure command or to fight in a team. A man who could fight well by himself made generally a bad soldier." This was even so the British wanted to defend a city, and World War I was all about trench warfare. And they dug trenches around the city to have the defense, and a lot of Arabs would not even get into the trenches. So they didn't understand it. They wanted to be, free and be able to do what they wanted to. And that was their style. There's a lot of myth and mystique around T.E. Lawrence. A lot of it was made up afterwards. But he was brilliant in the way that he dealt with that, because he realized that it couldn't be a command in that way. He didn't want to take on Ottoman armies directly. So instead, what he did was he used them and went around to like supply routes and doing raids in different places, and really became that pain in their side. So that as the British and the Australian and New Zealand armies that were helping him that area of the fighting, came in, they could be more successful in how they fought. And so he's given a huge amount of credit for making that Arab revolt actually work and do things that was very beneficial to the army at the time. Then you have Alfred Balfour, who was the British Foreign Secretary. And this is the famous Balfour Declaration. You can see the picture of it here. The Zionists were still pushing for something, and Britain wanted to make a statement. He wanted to make a statement out, so that any of the other ones that were supporting Germany or any Jews in the different places could help them. So they wanted to make a public statement. And so that's what Balfour did here. Lord Rothschild, he was the head of the Zionist movement in Britain. And so it was basically him sending this letter out to him to convey to the other Zionist groups out there that they will make a place in the Palestine area a home for the Jews. This obviously angered the Sharif, from before, but there was other things. Like here we have the Russian Revolution that just happened, like a month after that or a few days after that. And one of the things in the Russian Revolution, this is when the Bolsheviks and the communists, came in. They weren't too thrilled with World War I, as it was, all the death and destruction and the absolute mayhem that it caused around the world. But one thing that they did was that they published all the secret agreements that was done, including that Sykes-Picot Agreement, as well as all the other ones. There was a number of treaties. They just openly published it, let everybody see it, and they're basically mocking it like that World War I was just about this land grabs that these different countries are doing. And so that allowed the Arabs and all to see everything that had gone on, and that made them even angrier. Because then they knew that there's a lot of double dealing going on, and here they are putting their life and family and all that stuff, existence really on the line, and here Britain on the other side was making all these deals that they were not aware of. So then, shortly after, in October of 1918, they finally got the capture of Damascus. The Ottoman Empire had been on retreat for a while, that they finally got there. You can see, how far up on the map it was. And at that point, they basically knew it was over. And even Germany in the next month had their armistice on November 11th, 1918. It took a while for all the peace treaties to come about, and the Treaty of Versailles, was signed on June 28th, 1919. And the Hussein bin Ali, the guy that we had talked about at the beginning, he refused to sign it, because he was mad and upset, and he stated that he could not affix his name to a document assigning Palestine to the Zionists and Syria to foreigners. Now, we know what Zionists are, and there was already Zionists living in that area at the time. But it's also interesting, he couldn't assign Syria to foreigners. His words there was the people that were living in Syria already, but it was just a different sect of Islam than the one that he was doing, because he wanted it all, and he didn't care about the people that were already living there. He wanted the control of all of it at the time, and so he refused to sign. Britain even offered to give him £30,000 to sign it, which is the equivalent of $1.85 million today, and he still refused to sign it. And so we get to the end of World War I, and everybody in that area is mad, just mad. And we'll pick up more on that next week.
Thank you, Joel. Fascinating. The history of that area is fascinating. We wonder why there's so many troubles here yet today, and of course it has roots that go way, way back. So, but it actually goes back further than that. It goes back to, think about the Ishmaelites and all of the different people, Abrahamic descendants, causing a fair amount of issues. So, anyway, well, Lord,